Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Is a secret affair worthy of our marriage? Today's story has a similar plot. Enjoy watching. Stan exhaled the stale air of the clinic and stopped at the entrance to enjoy the sun on his face. He promised himself a coffee as soon as it was all over and crossed the hospital parking lot to an abandoned shopping arcade where two boys on BMX bikes circled aimlessly around security bollards and beat him into the alley, showing off their one-wheel tricks. He followed them slowly, each step requiring an effort of will. After a while, he stared out the dirty window of the dry cleaners. It was time to pull himself together. As expected, the news was bad and he was in a daze, his mind consumed with processing what he had heard. He should have brought Susie with him, and now he was trying to remember why he hadn't. His wife would have remembered everything the consultant oncologist said, taken appropriate notes, and asked better questions. Now, looking at the boys jumping over the broken sidewalk slab, he was filled with emptiness and disgust. It seemed that no time had passed since he himself had been a target as a schoolboy waiting for his life to begin. It's over now. Looking at this suburban wasteland, he might already be dust. There wasn't even a cafe. He had bladder cancer that had metastasized with secondary tumors in the pelvis and chest. The plan was emergency bladder surgery in 3 days, followed by radiation and chemotherapy. The oncologist did not sugarcoat his chances. He said they would evaluate the situation after the operation. "You mean I'll probably die?" The young doctor nodded, "But there is still hope for you. We will do our best to control any pain and give you the most of the time you have left. You must stay positive." Stan pulled himself together and took out his phone. A call to Susie's work went unanswered, and he waited silently, pleading for someone to pick up the phone. "Come on, Susie, answer. This time I really need to talk to you. Just this time." The phone was eventually answered by an unknown receptionist who said Susie was unavailable. He patiently explained that he was Susie's husband, that this was an emergency, and he urgently needed to talk to her. After a long silence, when the woman returned, she was abrupt. Susie was on vacation that day. He would have to look for her somewhere else. Stan was surprised and forgot about his problems for a moment. Susie was always at work, she never missed a day due to illness or any other reason. He dialed the house number just in case and listened as the call went to voicemail. Then he called her mobile. She'd never been good at answering calls, and he wasn't surprised when the call went to her voicemail. Instead of expressing his frustration to the machine, he sent a text, "Call me back as soon as you see this. Need to talk." By the time he got to his car, he had an answer. "What's the problem?" Weak as he was, it felt like a blow. Why didn't she call him? He called immediately, but again, the call went to voicemail. He felt very lonely. Susie had no reason to feel guilty, but she still worried about him. Most of the train journey to London, why didn't she tell Stan about the trip? Clifford was not her lover, he was her friend. Stan would have found it quite reasonable if she told him she wanted to help her friend. Her guilt was irrational. She worked a lot and had few hobbies. She deserved to enjoy her day off, and it had nothing to do with Stan. She drank a large coffee bought at the station and leafed through a fashion magazine. Rush hour had passed, and the carriage was almost empty. Despite her worries, she had fun, enjoying the moment of relaxation. Yes, she risked a little cheating over the years, but she didn't hurt anyone, and that was for the best. She met Clifford 3 years ago on a difficult day in a corporate law course. They worked together on a project once a week for a month and got into the habit of sharing their course struggles and work problems. When the course ended, they continued to communicate intermittently, mostly by phone at work, helping each other with legal problems. Gradually, it turned into friendship. Clifford had a keen sense of humor and a rational approach to life, which was a pleasant contrast to Stan's exuberant and highly individualistic style. The interpretation of contract law began to mix with the stories of their lives. Susie told Clifford about their difficulties finding housing. Stan was always arguing with his landlord or neighbors, and they had to move in response. Clifford shared scathing stories about his failed love life, which went from crisis to farce as his career blossomed. Susie looked forward to his messages which, once they stopped being strictly work-related, became late-night emails as a way to relax. They developed an easy friendship that they both valued as a distraction from the immediate pressures of their lives. From the very beginning, she knew that her feelings for Clifford were unprofessional. He fascinated her because he was so different from the men she knew. Stan was terribly sharp and unpredictable. She had to be on guard to cope with his mercurial style. Clifford was confident, smooth, and never lost his temper or didn't know what to say. Susie found their conversations much closer to the truth than with anyone else. She played the role of the mournful aunt and asked about his personal life, glad that he took her advice seriously. He dated wealthy, well-connected women he met through work, and his love affairs took a quick, predictable trajectory, starting with sparks and whistles and ending suddenly for no apparent reason in the dark. She told him it was because he had difficulty committing to relationships, that he couldn't trust others and was only happy when he was in control of the situation. Personally, she suspected that he enjoyed the thrill of the chase and missed women after he was successful. But for a time, he was deeply in love, a man who expressed his feelings openly and with humor, which she liked. She agonized over this long-distance relationship and decided that everything would be fine as long as they never met. Aware of the risks, she saw that nothing bad would happen as long as she followed this rule. Stan had no reason to complain, no one gets hurt, and everyone wins. She and Clifford were opposites. They were close and trusted each other to share their problems, but there was no chance that anything more than a friendly, supportive love could develop. Susie was breaking her own rule. She was on her way to meet her confidential friend, but the circumstances were exceptional. Clifford, who finally got married, sent her a letter in despair. He found out that his wife was cheating on him, and they separated. He was alone. His pleas for help were desperate. Susie knew she had to respond, even if it caused problems. Clifford was her friend, and it was right to sacrifice herself for him. She could tell Stan without going into the details of 5 years of secret correspondence. All he needed to know was that Clifford was her work friend. She considered this carefully, as she usually did at work when faced with a difficult decision. Her conclusion: why risk complicating the situation with an unnecessary confession? It would be his style to seize on some minor moment and spin everything out of control. And in any case, his sullen, gloomy brooding of recent weeks had made her reluctant to share her hopes and fears with him. She later wondered if she was anxious not so much because of the deception but because she was afraid that meeting Clifford would ruin their friendship. She hardly lived up to the league of his female conquests, and she might disappoint him, or he could irritate her into being sarcastic. She thought it over carefully, and by the time the train reached the outskirts of London, she was glad that she had made the right decision. It's time to meet and see if they truly share a unique understanding. Stan's text came as she got off the train at Euston Station. She felt irritated. Stan never sent her texts. Why now? She saw that she also missed a call from him, but then he knew that she didn't want personal calls during work hours. She was irrationally angry at him because, of course, the text was feeding her guilt. What could be so urgent that they needed to talk right away? Her response was essentially, "What's the problem?" What she really meant was, "Stop trying to ruin my special day." Almost immediately, she received another text. She read this one with relief: Bistro Cafe John Lewis. "Can't wait to see you. Love you, Cliff." She threw a few coins into a busker's hat on the tube ride to Oxford Circus and forgot about Stan's text. There is no mobile signal on the London Underground, so her text went unanswered. Susie stopped at the entrance to the bistro on the top floor, and her spirits lifted when she noticed Clifford sitting outside the window. He was looking at the rooftops of Oxford Street but turned when she approached, and his smile made her jump. They kissed each other on the cheeks, consciously greeting each other correctly, and Susie thought, "What have I done? I know him so well, and he's almost a stranger." A moment later, they embraced like long-separated lovers, arms wrapped around each other, kisses falling on face and lips. It was a simple pleasure, an expression of their relief at the meeting. Susie couldn't take her eyes off his face, and Clifford smiled benevolently, trying to understand what was happening and make the best of it. It was lunchtime, and they ate snacks. Stan would never do that. She chose a fresh fruit tart with cream, and Clifford took a bottle of beer with pork pie and pickles. They laughed at each other's choices, and after exchanging a few pieces of news, Clifford told his story. She was in shock listening to his story about how he found out about his wife's betrayal. She was a marketer for a large company and became friends with the head of the marketing agency she was hiring. He returned from a business trip to find that she had moved out, leaving only a note. Tears appeared as he spoke, and he clutched the fork like a weapon. It was a long story, and Susie had a lot to say in response. The intensity of the discussion left them exhausted, and they agreed to get some fresh air after finishing their meal. They walked around the men's and women's departments in the department store, then took a taxi to Cleopatra's Needle and walked together from the Thames through Embankment Gardens, up Whitehall past Downing Street to Trafalgar Square, where they went to the National Gallery to see a new painting by Titian. Susie was supposed to be home for dinner, but they were so carried away by each other that they forgot about the time. They sat in the gallery cafe, and she liked his ironic, measured way of speaking and his charming way of picking up on her comments and adding something without ever dismissing her point of view. As a break from his personal disaster, he talked about his work on a complex corporate takeover, and that was interesting to her too. They had so much in common. They went to the pub, where Susie had a glass of wine and started talking about Stan. It was wrong to discuss her relationship with her husband with another man, but she quickly got over it, trying to do Stan justice and highlight his good points, his generosity and courage, his enthusiasm and manic energy. But she also said how he had become withdrawn lately and didn't want to talk. She thought he was depressed and should see a doctor but was too arrogant to seek help. After work, when she was tired, his sarcasm and temper were more than she could bear, and his tone was so cruel that she felt as if she had been struck. Clifford was sympathetic and did not criticize Stan but supported her with his comments. "We all have the right to basic respect, and he has no right to take his problems out on you," he said. They were good for each other. Talking to Clifford, the dark corners of her life were filled with light. She hadn't enjoyed it as much as she does now for a long time. Clifford was happy, and in return, she received a companion who was happy to go shopping with her and talk endlessly about work, love, and things that interested them both. Clifford said it was a mistake not to meet. "We wasted too much time. We need each other," he said. She was forced to agree. "In the end, I sorted out my thoughts, but we can't date again. I love Stan, and being with you puts us in the wrong position. At least stay for dinner. We need to talk about what happened to us," he pleaded. She heard the desperation in Clifford's voice for the first time in a week. "My life became worth living. I was in such pain that I didn't know how I would survive. I was so alone, and thoughts of you kept me going," he confessed. She was going to get home before Stan and cook dinner so that he would never know about her trip to London. This was the most sensible plan. The late trains were rare and full of drunks, and staying in London would have meant getting involved in another story of deception. However, Clifford was right. They deserved to have dinner together. Unsatisfied with this conclusion, she realized that she was avoiding the main question. She wanted to stay, but she had no idea what, if anything, it meant. She didn't mean to flirt, but she felt safe and wanted Clifford to admire her. He was gentle, never made her feel uncomfortable, and never said a word to hurt Stan. She sat next to him and touched his beautiful hands from time to time. He placed his hand on hers, and they smiled, delighted with each other. It felt natural to touch, and of course, he had her full attention. He was fascinated. None of them were predators. They both wanted to know where this unusual adventure would take them. Although Susie felt justified in her actions, her guilt did not go away. The sensible way forward was to cool off and arrange another meeting once they had sorted out their feelings. Staying for dinner was foolhardy, but she still wanted to do it and didn't know what was right anymore. With a heroic effort of will, she released her hand from Clifford's grasp and excused herself, went to the toilet, and turned on the phone. As the screen lit up, she remembered Stan's text asking her to call and was surprised that he didn't follow through with her response. Whatever he wanted, it couldn't be urgent. She dialed his mobile number, searching for words for her lie. "She's been called to an urgent meeting in London, and it ends late." She didn't know when she would be able to free herself. This never happened, but it was plausible that her work could take her to London, and Stan had no way of checking. It was irrational, but she decided it would be okay to stay if she told Stan where she was. He didn't answer the call. Frustrated, she sent him a text, sorry for not responding sooner. Urgent meeting, stuck in London. We'll be back late. It was a poor substitute for conversation, but she felt some relief in sending the lie. Before she could put her phone in her bag, another text arrived. Stan must have kept his phone on and handy after all. What meeting at work? They said you're on vacation, he questioned. She blushed and sank into her chair, stunned at how quickly her lie was exposed. Why didn't Stan pick up the phone to talk? What could he know? She tried to concentrate but was distracted by thoughts of her failure. One small inaccuracy, and it was instantly detected. She called his number again and again, but the call was unanswered. This gave her confidence. What could Stan expect if he played children's games with her? Being caught in a lie was humiliating, but she was determined not to let herself be put at a disadvantage. She thought carefully before sending another text. Didn't mean to bother you. In fact, with my aunt in Tunbridge Wells. She's feeling bad and asked for help. Don't worry, I'll be back tomorrow. Why did she say don't worry, and why I'll be back tomorrow? Alarmed by her behavior and her lies, she knew she couldn't face Stan. At the time of writing, she decided to stay in London overnight. She had lost control and needed time to pull herself together before confronting her husband. Moments later, she realized it was wrong. The smart decision was to stick to my plan and return home. She surprises Stan by returning on the last train from Tunbridge Wells. Stan could have jeopardized everything with both Clifford and Stan. Relieved that she had made a decision, she put down the phone and hurried back to Clifford. Clifford grabbed her urgently when she returned, running his hand over her shoulder and neck before kissing her on the lips. You were gone so long. I was afraid you had run away, he said. She immediately felt better and calmed down from Clifford's relief. But after they hugged for a while, she pulled away, deciding that she needed to think for both of them. She knew she was in trouble, but she surprised herself again. Cliff, I need a hotel room for tonight. Don't insist, but I'll stay in London for the night. That means we can have dinner without worrying about time, but after dinner, I'll say good night. Do you understand? We have to protect what we have, she explained. He nodded and kissed her. Thank you, Susie. You're a miracle. I don't know how I manage without you, Clifford replied. Susie accepted her plan, but she was horrified that even after deciding to return home, she decided to stay. It was cowardly because she knew that she couldn't face Stan while her feelings for Clifford were so fresh in her mind. It will be stronger in the morning, she assured herself. While Clifford was calling the hotel for her, she looked at her phone, but there were no new texts. Unable to relax, she called Stan's cell number and home number again. No answer. Why is Stan so annoying, she muttered. They finished their drinks, and Clifford found a hotel. He was thinking about places to eat. To hell with it, Susie thought. Enjoy your dinner and worry about the rest of your life later. She took Clifford's arm and pressed her cheek to his, comforted by his scent. She no longer knew what was right, and she didn't care. At some point during dinner, as Clifford ate his lemon tart and Susie ate her chocolate panna cotta, their conversation turned directly from developments in corporate law to themselves. Today was like a miracle, Clifford said. I never thought I could be this happy again. I want to be with you so much, Susie said, but you know I can't. It would embarrass us both and ruin everything. We have to be realistic about when we can be together and not be greedy. You're right, Clifford replied seriously. The few opportunities we have to express our feelings will be very valuable. Nothing else matters. It's a lie. Staying apart is a self-inflicted wound, Susie argued. Then what is it, Susie? I love you, Clifford confessed. She felt the pressure of his hand through her clothes and his warm and powerful presence so close to her. It felt right to her, but she was careful not to take unnecessary risks. When he put his hand on her knee, she put her hand on his. Clifford, please don't ruin dinner. I enjoyed it so much. You're charming, I like you so much, but I'm married. I'm not free like you to express my feelings. But you can say it. You have to tell me, do you love me even a little bit? You know the answer to that. Would I do this if I didn't love you? He replied, kissing her again. Then she pushed him away, looking at Clifford's dark curls on his collar and his attentive, thoughtful eyes. She knew without a doubt that she loved him. It was a shock because she imagined that loving Stan immunized her from loving another man. And she lied, was a natural part of her feelings for Clifford. It wasn't about pleasure but about developing the bond they shared. She couldn't believe that at her age, after so many years of training and experience doing the right thing, she could think like a teenager infatuated with her first love. She needed to think carefully, and her cynical, knowing adult mind told her that the right thing to do was share the bed with Clifford. Everything else was a blatant lie driven by loyalty to Stan and a desire to avoid being put in the wrong position. She lost her bearings, and in this confusion of thoughts and feelings, she continued to refuse Clifford, who was very understanding. They finished their coffee, and it was 10 o'clock in the evening. Worried now and feeling that she would have done better if she had limited herself to one glass of wine, Susie went to the toilet again. If only she could talk to Stan, she's sure she could make things right. She took out her phone, and there was no response to her previous text. She called home, then Stan's cell phone again with no answer. Stan should be home now. Why isn't he answering? Guilt washed over her, suddenly convinced that he knew. That he knew she was with her lover. That was enough. She could cope with the feeling of guilt, but not with the disgust of being caught up in such a vulgar intrigue. She knew Stan's mental acuity. It scared her sometimes when he noticed things that everyone else missed. Stan knew she was a traitor, and his contempt was unbearable. He would have destroyed her, and she would have crawled away from the ruins, crippled. She returned to the table as Clifford finished paying the bill. "Clifford, I want to, but I can't. I'm sorry. We need to say goodbye. This is all too sudden for me, and I can't handle it. It's just not right." Relief filled her as she said this. She ran out into the fresh air, and Clifford hurried after her. It was dark, the theaters were emptying, and they were caught up in the stream of people who passed them on their way to the subway. Clifford held her hand and said something. She saw tears in his eyes, and she felt strong again, able to make a concession. "We may have one last drink at my hotel, but that's it. We had a wonderful day. I will never forget it, and who knows what will happen next." Nothing is for sure until this moment. There was no way she could have ended up in bed with Clifford. She wasn't drunk. She made it clear that she would not sleep with him. Would have been harmless and enjoyable, but she had no desire to live with the fear of discovery, the need to weigh every word she said to Stan, and the guilt that would stay with her forever. They went to the hotel bar, and Clifford ordered champagne to celebrate a great day, one that would stand out for both of them amid the drab routine of work. Relieved that she had pulled herself together and made a smart decision, she enjoyed their drink, kissed Clifford seductively because she loved him and was grateful for his understanding, and because it was the right thing to do. He deserved her affection, and she wanted him to love her. Stan could give it to her without harm. Everything was fine, and she could handle Stan without being paralyzed by shame. She regained her composure, and must have let her guard down because 2 hours later, Clifford was sleeping next to her in her hotel bed. He smiled in his sleep, his breathing sounding like a cat purring. It was not clear to her how this happened. She must have acted like a teenage virgin. They embraced in the hotel bar, dreading the moment when they would have to say goodbye, but embarrassed to show their passions so clearly in public. They finished the champagne. It was late, and they hugged each other, tears welling up in their eyes, desperate. "It's so important. We have to do everything we can to keep that feeling," Susie said. "I will treasure this moment for the rest of my life," Clifford said. "Nothing else matters." "We deserve this moment," Susie said. "I want you to know how much you mean to me. I love Stan, but you shouldn't doubt the feelings I have for you." "Show me," said Clifford. "You're the smartest girl I know. Show me that these aren't just some sly manipulative words from a lawyer." Minutes later, they were in the bedroom, on the bed, and Clifford's hand was under Susie's blouse. She leaned back, glad that her indecisiveness was behind her. Clifford was awkward and unathletic, but on the other hand, he must have learned something from his series of failed relationships. She let him take the lead and could even enjoy his clumsiness. It was part of his character. He was more persistent than Stan and tried harder. Therefore, giving herself up to pleasure seemed like a small price to pay, and Susie did everything possible. Clifford was already her man, and she wanted him to be satisfied with her. They both wanted this to be a special moment in their lives, but it wasn't. They were tired and had drunk too much, and either way, they both knew, even if they couldn't say it out loud, that had been a mistake. Susie loved Clifford, and that was why she brought him to bed. She wanted to please him, and this seemed like the right way to express her feelings. Now that it was done, she knew it was wrong and wondered how she could lose so much for so little. Not strengthen their bond with Clifford, he messed everything up. She was forced to lie to Stan. It was necessary, but she had taken a step that would change the rest of her life, and she already regretted it. Stan sat in his empty house, wondering what it would be like to have 3 days to live, or at least 3 days with full capabilities. By 7 o'clock in the evening, he stopped expecting Susie to come in and began to think seriously about what her absence meant. He was not stupid and knew that something was wrong between them. There was no aunt, no business meeting, and he knew she had gone to London for her own reasons. He reread her texts and was only surprised that she would come up with such a careless lie. She had been too busy this morning to notice his anxiety, and he watched as she put a change of clothes into her work bag. Why would she go to work wearing one outfit and then change into something more casual? Because she had no intention of staying at work. Why go through the effort of changing clothes? Because there was someone she wanted to impress. Why not dress at home for a date? Because she wanted to hide her intentions. He wasn't dead yet, but she had already left him behind and moved on. Details that had confused him at the time now came back to torment him. In the morning when she left for work, she did not respond to his usual farewell kiss, but then she corrected herself and kissed him warmly, and he remembered the argument a few nights ago about whether to buy organic milk instead of the cheapest one. He said to buy organic because it ensured the cows were allowed to go out to pasture. She said that depriving animals of pasture was reducing food productivity and was leading to world hunger, an argument he had never heard her make before and which conflicted with her usual concern for animal health. When he said it was nonsense, she got angry and said that many people believe it, and when he asked her who exactly, she fell silent. She didn't care about losing the argument, but she felt bad that he had refuted and ruined the argument. Could it be because it came from a special friend whose opinion she admired and whom she could not name? He knew Susie. He had the whole day to think, and by the middle of the evening, he knew without a doubt, with all the foresight of a mind freed from a body cleansed by illness, that she was with her lover. He didn't need any more proof, and a pang of anxiety tightened his chest. He trusted her, and she failed him when he needed her most. For months, something had been wrong, but he doubted his feelings, confusing her coldness with his fears about his health. They were a close couple, spending most of their free time together when they weren't at work, in comfortable closeness. They had mutual friends and enjoyed hanging out with each other's families. But since the beginning of the year, they have had few common topics of conversation, and neither of them has made an effort to organize dinners, weekends, or evenings at the theater together. He thought it was because he was tired from being sick, but now he wasn't so sure. Susie was a smart woman. If they were still close, she would have noticed that he was not feeling well and would have known that it was her job to help, just as they helped each other in moments of crisis. Stan knew he needed to pull himself together. He didn't want to spend the rest of his time paralyzed by hatred and self-pity. It's much better to stop this whining and get on with the rest of your life. Eventually, his disgust with depression led him to make coffee and force himself to be cheerful. He turned on the music, London Calling by The Clash. It suited his mood. His wife left him. Well, he will leave her. Dying is a very final separation. He sipped his coffee and thought about what he liked to do most. It took him a while to decide that he would miss the moment of surprise and joy of reaching the top of a mountain on a clear day, that rare moment when a new view opens up before you and the effort of the climb is behind you. If there was one place he should have gone before he died, it would have been the Lake District, a place of happy memories of trekking and climbing in his youth when he was too poor to travel abroad. There was nothing stopping him from going there now. He thought about it. He had camped at the top of wastewater many times in the rain and cold and was jealous of people rich enough to stay at the isolated wastewater hotel. A quick search online for details, and he called the hotel. He was surprised that there was room available the next night. It seemed like fate. He finished his coffee, wrote a short letter to Susie, packed a bag with his warmest clothes, and left the house around midnight. When he put his phone on charge in the car, he saw that he had missed another call. This time he was not curious about Susie's whereabouts. She didn't respond to his request to call, and he didn't want to hear her lie. It took him 4 hours to drive along deserted roads. He stopped midway to eat breakfast at a sleepy auto repair shop on the motorway. Dawn lit the air from the mountains beyond as he drove the final miles along the shore of wastewater. He parked the car, changed into his boots, and walked along the lake before having lunch at the hotel bar. He already felt better. The pain is gone, his energy returned in the mountain air, and he relaxed, knowing he had the whole day ahead of him to do as he pleased. He calculated his strength. He didn't have a map, so he refreshed his memory of the route he wanted to take from the map on the wall of the bar, Scafell Summit via Lord's Rake, then Scafell Pikes. He bought a pre-packed lunch, chocolate bars, and Kendal mint cake to make sure he didn't run out of fuel. Then he set off. It was still early, but there were already other hikers on the trail who had decided to take advantage of the clear weather to hike to the top of England's highest mountain. After several hundred feet of climbing, his hip began to ache, and he was forced to slow down, placing each step carefully. He swallowed a couple of ibuprofen with a sip of stream water and decided he could handle the pain. He even found the strength to overtake 1 or 2 of the slowest travelers. It was calmer as he turned off the main path onto the path to Lord's Rake, climbing through a narrow gap in the rock to the top of Scafell. The climb to the start of the rocky chute became steeper and more difficult as he climbed, and he slowed down even more, knowing that the rocky climb would test his hip. After a difficult climb, he arrived at the base of the climb and found 2 young women in bright yellow and pink outfits studying the route, looking up the rock face and down at their map. Panting, he stopped as he approached them and greeted them. "Do you know if this leads to the top of Scafell?" asked the girl in pink leggings and headphones. It was nice to see a beautiful face. He smiled and showed them where they were on their map. "This is Lord's Rake. It's a good route if you have a good head on your shoulders and don't mind climbing rocks," he replied. "Is it safe?" asked the girl in a yellow fleece. She, too, seemed delighted with her day. "The main risk comes from rocks that could knock someone taller than you down. If we climb together, we can make sure we don't hurt each other," they agreed, and Stan led them. He explained his illness because he had to stop every dozen feet he climbed. The girls were attentive and asked him reasonable questions. By the time they reached the top of the chute and onto the open slope, they learned of his cancer, and in return, he learned that Bella and Simone had just finished their final psychology exams at Lancaster University. Both were yearning for fresh air and open space after non-stop studying since Easter. They stayed together on the arduous journey to the top of Scafell, and he felt guilty for being so absorbed in their cheerfulness, their enjoyment of the environment, their youth and beauty, and their willingness to be his nurses. He shared his chocolate with them at the top of Scafell, and they grouped together, hoods up against the biting wind from the Irish Sea. Then they descended to Melior, a pass between peaks, before joining the well-trodden path to the large mound at the top of Scafell Pikes. They were in no hurry, and sometimes he had to stand steady, holding onto each girl's shoulder, but they managed to join the enthusiastic crowd gathered around the mound and looking over the mountaintops towards Scotland. Not once along the way did he think about Susie or death for a moment. Despite the pain, he felt whole again. Susie slept well after the excitement of her night with Clifford. She made him leave at 2 o'clock in the morning, woke up early in a great mood, showered, had breakfast at the hotel, caught the train back to London, and went home to change. Relieved that her adventure had been a success, she was now in a hurry, realizing that she was late for work. With the benefit of a night's sleep, she began to believe that she had handled the situation well. So what if she gave in to temptation? That was behind her, and now her task was to return to normal life. She acted according to her beliefs and survived. On her way home from the station, she stopped and changed back into the outfit she left in the day before. With her story back in control, she was ready to explain herself to Stan. The terrible moment of panic when she didn't know what to do was forgotten. Be that as it may, she had done the job, and now she needed to move on. Stan wasn't home, the house was empty. Susie was disappointed because she would have preferred to get rid of this burden right away. Now she would have to remember her speech until the evening. She quickly showered and put on a new dark blue business suit. She couldn't afford to be late all the time, and if she and Clifford met again, she would suggest meeting somewhere in the middle so that it would be a day's journey, a joy that could be enjoyed occasionally. She had always wanted to visit Cambridge with time for a thorough tour of the Fitzwilliam Museum and King's College Chapel. She would suggest this to Clifford. Stan didn't like exploring country towns or shopping or spending a lot on an average meal at a country pub. And no matter how they spent their day, she would try to get home at the usual time and be ready for work the next morning, dressed in uniform and feeling fresh. Susie hurried downstairs, looking for her phone and keys in the kitchen. She stopped to look at the previous day's mail pinned to the bulletin board. There, next to the mail, she found a note written in pencil, "Received bad news. I left to think. Not sure when I'll be back. At least on Friday. I hope you enjoyed your night in London. Say hi to your friend for me. Stan." She read it several times, and her first reaction was irritation. What was Stan up to now? Then she carefully read it again. What's the bad news? Why couldn't Stan say what he meant? She sat down on the steps, exhaling. Could Stan's mother have died? She dismissed the thought. Stan wouldn't leave without telling her. Did he lose his job? Maybe he worked for an aggressive telecommunications company that was constantly changing its middle management structure. He survived many bloody battles but always said that one day his luck would run out. Or he could lose his temper and be fired for his behavior. Stan was smart, but his temper was never completely under control. She reread the sarcastic part about her friend several times. Stan tried to confuse her, and annoyed that she couldn't voice her defense, she picked up the phone and called his cell phone. There was no answer. She then called Stan's work and spoke to his secretary, whom she knew by name. The girl seemed a little embarrassed, as if Susie was trying to drag her into some dubious plot. Stan took sick leave, the girl said. Sick leave? Susie repeated. Sick leave? He checks in until the end of next week. Nonsense, Mary. Stan isn't sick. Susie missed the confusion of a girl having to tell her wife that her husband was sick. He didn't tell me what it was, but he's in pain. He can't hide it all day, and it shows when he's tired. You should have noticed it. The girl was clearly upset by this topic from pain. Susie hung up. This conversation was surreal, and she wondered what Stan was up to. Stan couldn't be sick, she would have noticed. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Yes, he could. This is exactly what happened. Now that she thought about it, she remembered in recent weeks Stan had stopped walking up the stairs quickly like he always did. She could imagine him trundling along as if he were carrying a box of books. And he began to get up at night to go to the toilet, and it was difficult for him to get up in the morning. Like Stan at all, and there was pain. He never told her about it, but she remembered him bending over to get something from under the kitchen sink and grimacing, unable to straighten up. She laughed at him and said he was getting old. Now it no longer seemed funny. In fact, she was horrified to realize how much she had seen without drawing obvious conclusions. What was she thinking? Then she began to feel nauseous. Could Stan really find out about Clifford? He knew about computers and could read her emails, although it was something she couldn't imagine. Was his illness a cover for the emotional pain it caused him? It was becoming a nightmare, so she took off her jacket and went to the kitchen to get water. It was too terrible to imagine, but she couldn't shake the thought. Shaking her head and irritated at the unfairness of her situation, she tried to concentrate on what to do. Her mind was paralyzed, but she knew she had to talk to Stan. She stared at the phone. Why couldn't they talk on the phone? She pressed the button to display recent calls. Listed among the unanswered calls from her cell phone was an unfamiliar number that had called yesterday afternoon. She picked up the phone and dialed the number. Good morning, Wastewater Hotel, how may I help you? Susie caught on quickly. These were the kinds of puzzles she could handle. She said her name. Do you have my husband's reservation? He forgot to tell me. Stanley Marshall, yes, madam. For tonight, but it was for one person, single room. It is perfect. Susie hung up and began to think. Okay, Stan might not have been feeling well, but he wasn't too bad if he could rush off to the Lake District to go mountain climbing. Stan hiked and climbed when life got too hard, not when he was sick. He had to lie to his job in that case. Why? There could only be one explanation for why he could have acted this way impulsively and without explaining to her. Now she was crying bitter tears of self-pity and denial and tears for the damage caused. Stan knew. She called work and said she needed time to deal with a family emergency. She didn't think about the meetings that would have to be rescheduled or the deadlines that would go undone. Having changed again, she was not a walker, but she had suitable shoes, a fleece, and waterproof clothing. She made coffee, studied the hotel map and website, set up her GPS, and checked her cache. Looking at her mobile phone, she saw 2 texts from Clifford and left them unread. Still no word from Stan. After finishing her coffee, she went out to the car. Stan had a dull ache in his hip that was better than the shooting, tearing agony he felt as he pulled onto the freeway. He needed to sit down, and he gave Bella money to buy drinks while he and Simone made their way through the noisy and crowded hotel bar and settled down at the end of a bench near the coal fireplace. The warmth in the bar worked well against his tired body, and he relaxed. Everywhere, there were broad backs holding pints of beer tightly, red cheeks, and people laughing as they talked about their exploits in the mountains. Bella chatted, and Stan tried to smile, but he felt sick and exhausted. It was only when Simone returned, and he was sipping his beer that he felt better. It was decided that after a while, the girls would use the bath in his room to freshen up before returning to the university. They sat back and studied the menu, enjoying the warmth and shelter from the sun and wind. When they had recovered a little, they ordered food. Stan chose beef pie and potato chips. It was a good idea, but he couldn't eat much. The girls did much better and even finished his chips. He wanted another drink and looked around the bar to decide which beer to try next. He saw Susie clearly through the crowd of climbers. This was the strangest thing. She looked out of place, and he wondered how she could be here. At that moment, before she saw him, her fear and uncertainty were unmasked, and he knew that she would make him miserable again. On impulse, he grabbed the hands of his companions. "Before you go, I want to thank you for today. I hope we all remember today as a special day," he said, leaning over and kissing each girl on the cheek. "Stan?" Susie was next to him, fear giving way to indignation. He rose to his feet with difficulty and kissed his wife. "How did you find me, Susie? You're just in time for a drink. Let me introduce Bella and Simone. They're my friends, and they care about me, so don't worry." All 3 women looked puzzled. "Maybe this is a good time for you girls to use the bathroom. Come back to say goodbye before you go." Simone nodded and smiled uncertainly. "Thanks, Stan. Take care, you're a wonderful person. We'll say goodbye when we get the room key back." "Keep fighting, Stan," Bella said, patting him on the shoulder. "Keep climbing those mountains. I'll never forget the top of Scaffold Pikes, especially when you scaled the mound and shouted you God to the sky." She leaned down and kissed his bald head. Left alone, Stan and Susie looked at each other. "Stan, what's wrong with you, and who are these girls? I read your note, but what does it mean?" "They are my friends, psychology students from Lancaster University. We met at the Lord's Rake. Wonderful girls, their enthusiasm helped me get to the top of Scaffold Pikes. What about you? It seems you have made a wasted journey. I sent you a message that said we need to talk, but that's not important anymore. There was no need to come get me. A call yesterday would have been enough. So why are you here?" "I'm worried." "What happened? What did you want to tell me?" "Relax, my 2 lovely assistants took care of me. I just needed human sympathy and support, and they are stars. I went to the hospital. Was it yesterday? I had stomach pains, and they ran some tests. I have bladder cancer." Susie gripped the edge of the table. She still didn't sit down. "I knew it. Why didn't you say anything? You should have told me. I tried to tell you, but you didn't answer the phone or call me back when I asked. Remember, you were visiting your aunt in Tunbridge Wells. Which aunt was it?" "I forget. Your mother was an only child, I remember. Then I waited to tell you when you got home, but you didn't come home last night, and there's no phone signal here. Susie shook her head wearily. But what did the doctor say? Surely they can cure bladder cancer. So what are you doing here? I have surgery on Friday, so I thought I'd go for a walk while I can. The thing is, the cancer has metastasized, it's only going to get worse, so I'm doing it while I can. But tell me, what's wrong with you? How's your aunt? Susie ignored the question and closed her eyes. It was worse than a nightmare. How could things go so bad so quickly? Stan, I'm so sorry. I should have answered the phone. I wasn't there when you needed me. I feel terrible. Stan looked at her curiously. This was nothing like his wife. She rarely admitted mistakes and, as a matter of principle, never admitted weakness. It doesn't matter. This is about me, not about you. Stop feeling guilty. We all die alone anyway. Now, tell me what's wrong with you. He looked straight into her face, and she looked down shyly. She forced herself to look at him. Please, St. Now is not the time. I want to take care of you. Let me take you home, and then we can talk. I'm so worried about you. Trust me, if you only have 3 days left, you know what's important, and I want to know what's wrong with you. Is your aunt better? I hope you were able to help her. Tears rolled down her cheeks and fell onto her hand. I came looking for you, Stan, as soon as I could, but I had to go to London. She spoke slowly, not sure what she would say next. She was ashamed of her lies. I didn't visit my aunt, you knew that, and it was stupid of me to lie, but this is the worst time to force you to listen to my story. I don't have any other time I can bear it. They fell silent. Stan nudged the muscular climber standing with the youth group behind them and asked if he would mind getting them drinks. My leg is dead, he explained, handing over a 20 PB note. Buy yourself some drinks. What's wrong with your leg? Susie demanded. I walked too much, and my hip went right through. He watched him closely, and it was clear that he was suffering. His face was wrinkled and gray, his eyes sunken and dull. The feeling of a nightmare did not go away. If there was a God who punished sins, he would definitely demand a heavy price for her sins. Leaning across the table, she kissed him. Listen to my confession, Stan. Don't think badly of me, at least until I tell you everything. I love you, I'm so sorry for what happened, and I'll never forgive myself for not being with you when you needed me. I won't leave you until I die. What is it, Susie? Stan felt cold. He really didn't want to, but it was better to know than not to know. Susie began her story hesitantly, and he found the strength to push her when she didn't want to say her lover's name. He told her to shut up. He was not interested in lies and half-truths. She began to cry again, but he did not console her, and after a while, she continued. His name is Clifford, and I met him in law school, and we corresponded from time to time about work, but we didn't meet until yesterday. It wasn't an affair. Under the circumstances, she decided that the full truth was more than Stan needed to know. How many letters? 10? 100? 1,000? More like 1,000. We never intended to meet, it wasn't like that. But then something went wrong with him, and he needed to talk to me, another job problem, 1 in 1,000, she shook her head. His wife left him, you said you were in a professional relationship, he came to you with his marital problems, and you reciprocated, and his problems required you to spend the night, only because it was late, there was a lot to talk about, and I didn't want to rush to catch a late train. He was in a terrible state, he had no idea that he had problems in his marriage. We are not lovers, I don't love him. Lies, 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 he didn't realize that his secret affair with a married woman could anger his wife. No, Stan, she didn't leave because of us, she didn't know about us. And it's not an affair. It's not fair to say that you consoled each other. Agreed with him that his wife couldn't have known about the two of you because you were both so smart, he said, what his wife was for abandoning him, and consoled him by saying that he still has you, and you needed the night to show Cliff how much comfort you can give. Stan, don't be bitter. I spent the night alone, and our correspondence has nothing to do with Clifford's marriage. It's evil to say that. He looked at her, and she knew he could tell she was lying. They knew each other too well. How do I know this, Susie? Because you say so? If you spent the night with your lover, you would lie about it. There would be some hard reasoning to justify it to yourself. Don't hurt an old man unnecessarily, or what, something like that. But I know you're a cheater. As long as you think you can get away with it, she shook her head wearily. It's as if this professional relationship wasn't something to be ashamed of. Nothing happened that needed to be hidden from a trusting spouse. So why was it a secret? Was it really just professional respect between you two, or was there something more? When you kissed him goodbye, was it his cheeks or his lips? Entrusting him with your dirty secrets instead of his wife, letting him feed off easy reassurances that he wasn't the reason his marriage failed. Don't you really think that was part of the problem? And that it wasn't love, but you chose to be with him and not with the husband you claimed to love? That's a slippery word, love. She could not answer, and there was silence. You talked about our marriage when Cliff didn't talk about his. The things about me that make you angry, all the little hurts you've suffered over the years, the disappointed hopes. How hard is it for women still? She could not answer. You're in love with him, but you want to find a more noble, self-serving word than cheating. It seemed like a long time passed before she spoke. I don't know. Yes, I love Clifford. It would be wrong to deny it, but that doesn't take anything away from my love for you. That will never change. I understand. It doesn't change anything. When I needed you, you were busy comforting your lover. Perhaps you never thought that marriage comes with obligations as well as benefits. No, Stan, if I knew you needed me, I would drop everything and come to you, you know that. Now, you make the conditions. You would have come if you knew you were needed. Sorry, but this is not the deal. Marriage is an unconditional union of mutual support. Anyway, I tried to tell you, but you were too busy with your lover to make yourself available and answer the phone. Come with me now, I'll show you that I'm serious. I won't hurt you anymore, we'll get through this together. Stan shook his head. The rugby mountain climber finally brought their drinks with a slight smile and spilled a few coins on the table. Use it, he said, smiling at Susie, and tomorrow, go out to those hills. Stan took a sip of his beer and thought, it's good that you have a lover. I had a good time today, although it was hard at times. I'm not the same person I was, but I don't need your pity. We have the health service to take care of me. I'll have to go home to get things for the hospital, but I won't interfere with your new life. Come back with me, said Susie, we can pick up your car later. He shook his head. I'll stay here as long as I can, as long as the weather is good. You go back to Clifford, you need to think about the future. I'll stay with you, we'll manage your room somehow, she offered. Again he shook his head. I don't want you here. I don't want to feel angry, I want peace. Why do I need you to remind me of everything that has gone wrong in my life? You are as much a symptom of the disease as the pain from my cancer. I don't need your pity or your free time from your lover. Their conversation was interrupted by Bella and Simone, pale and desperate. Stan persuaded them to drink before they left, and when they sat down, he asked them to stay another day. It's just one day, and it will mean a lot to me. You can have my room, I'll sleep in your tent. Don't make me beg, but you know how I'm doing. I need you here, and in return, we can have a good time. I have money, and you have youth and energy. What could be better? Susie squeezed his hand. I'm here, honey. I came because I love you, Stan. I will follow you to the ends of the earth, set on your way with the kisses and caresses of your lover. No wonder you have so much to give. The two students exchanged glances, trying to figure out what was going on and feeling awkward about being in the middle of such a situation. We have classes tomorrow, Bella said weakly. We'll get the drinks. She and Simone walked toward the bar, apparently to talk, leaving Stan and Susie alone. Susie squeezed his hand. Stan, I failed you. I will never forgive myself for this, and I have no intention of making the situation worse. Now, let me do everything I can to make it right. I want to take care of you, you need me. Stan struggled to his feet. Good offer, but I don't want to waste time negotiating time off your schedule with your lover. I'm dead meat. Women are smart in the courting game, and Cliff is a much better choice. Stay with him, I'll do this alone. I don't know why you found me, but go home. I don't want you here. He went to the bar. The crowd thinned out as people retired early. The girls bought their drinks but clearly didn't want to interrupt Stan and Susie's conversation. He hugged them both. "Don't mind me if you have things to do at the university tomorrow. You should go. I can handle it myself." "Will your wife stay?" Bella asked. He shook his head. "It's a hard life caring for a sick husband and also a lover. She needs to come back." "We have decided to stay," Bella said. "We can take the time, and we enjoyed our walk so much today that we would like to continue tomorrow. But we will not take your bed. We will sleep on our rugs on the floor of your room. If we all get up early, we can go with you in the morning and then go straight to the university. It's early enough for us." Tears rolled down Stan's cheeks. How is it that strangers can be so kind? They even tried to protect his pride by suggesting that they were staying for themselves, not for him. "Let's go up to Pillar and Steeple. I went up there in the clouds, and I would like to see them in all their glory. But only if you want. I am a vampire, sucking the life out of you young women. I can only do this with your help." They assured him it was a great plan and went to bed. Susie left without Stan noticing. Susie was oblivious to her surroundings as she drove home on the narrow roads out of the Lake District. She was tense with fatigue and humiliation. Stan more or less told her to leave, and why did Stan make this scene with those girls? This was clearly done to humiliate her. The roads were empty, and by the time she got onto the highway, she had accepted the idea that Stan had some justification for his behavior. She didn't want to offend him, but she did to fix the situation. She needed time to show that she still cared about him and would do everything she could to help him through his illness. It was just bad luck that she didn't answer the phone when he received his diagnosis, but if he had allowed her to go with him to the hospital, there would have been no problem. Stan realizes this when he calms down. She was proud of herself for telling him the truth about Clifford. Whatever happened next, Stan couldn't accuse her of being dishonest. She will be ready for him to return home, confident that she can make things right. After all, it was so in his best interest for her to take care of him, visit him while he was in the hospital, and look after him when he returned home. She will talk to her employers and is confident that they will provide her with maternity leave so that she can devote herself fully to his care. Tomorrow she will tell Clifford what happened. He will help her put everything in perspective, and he will understand that her husband should come first. Now she arrived home at 3 o'clock in the morning and fell on her bed, tired and unwashed, convinced that she had done the right thing. She was fast asleep. Stan returned to the hospital and sat alone on a plastic chair in the oncology waiting room. The tests done at the doctor's office were missing somewhere, and he couldn't be accepted for surgery until they were found. He waited an hour to be seen and thought that he had been forgotten. The clerk then informed him that someone was waiting in the preparation room to retake the tests. He sat back down on the cart in the small preparation room and continued to wait, feeling like he had signed his life's verdict. As he walked into the hospital, there was nothing to read, nothing to look out the window, and after another hour, he was still waiting. Of course, he had a lot to think about. Left alone in a quiet room, his anxiety began to seem like panic. He must be a coward because every muscle and nerve in his body was urging him to leave. Why let the doctors cut it when there is no hope? He also tried to understand his few minutes with Susie. He returned from the north overnight and arrived home at 7 o'clock in the morning to find her waiting for him, sitting at the kitchen table, ready to leave for work. She told him that she had packed a hospital bag for him and that she would visit him in the evening. He refused coffee because he shouldn't have eaten or drunk before the appointment and told her not to worry about the visit. He would still be under anesthesia. She asked about the details of the surgery and what special precautions he would need when he returned home. Clifford was not mentioned, although he stood between them like the Berlin Wall. "Don't come at all," Stan said. "I don't need your sympathy, and I might feel like you're just checking to see if I'm dying fast enough." Bitter words, but they brought him satisfaction. Susie looked like he had hit her. "I won't come if you don't want me," she replied sharply, "but don't pretend it has anything to do with me and Clifford. I met him once every 5 years because he needed a friend. Big deal. Don't bother with this make drama. Cheating is vile. It's about ego and people who can't control their greed and who lie when they think it's the easiest way. If they want something, they take it, and everyone else can be sent away. I understand now, leave." Susie went to work, holding back tears. His outburst made Stan feel a little better. Left alone in his small room, Stan became overwhelmed with the desire to take control of the rest of his life. It was a mistake to let medical professionals decide what to do. Before he could act on the thought, a young man in a white coat came in, read his notes, and looked at Stan as if he were a shy schoolboy. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I'm waiting on some blood tests." "You shouldn't hide here," the doctor said cheerfully. "What's your name?" He looked at the file in his hand and said with artificial cheerfulness, "Pull yourself together, human. You should have been in pre-op an hour ago. We're waiting for you." "I was told that you must complete some tests before the operation is confirmed," Stan protested. "Nonsense. Nobody said that. Go there now, and don't hesitate." The doctor left, and Stan stood up, his decision made. Life couldn't get any worse, and it was time to stand up for himself. He hadn't been defeated yet. He walked back through the waiting room, and his pain and fatigue disappeared as he left the oncology ward. By the time he was in his car, he knew he was right to trust his instincts. He could expect a few days or weeks of decent living followed by rapid deterioration. Whatever the time, it had to be better than spending his last days on the operating table. He would enjoy life while he could, and then, he didn't want to delay it. He stopped for coffee and a Danish pie before driving home. He arrived about 3 hours after he saw Susie leave for work and was surprised to find her car in the driveway. Next to hers, blocking his place, stood an unfamiliar black BMW convertible. He parked on the road and walked around the strange car, hoping to recognize the owner. Not being in the mood for visitors, he followed the path along the side of the house to the back and took the spare key to the back door from a pot of flowers in the greenhouse. The door opened into the kitchen, the filter coffee machine was brewing coffee, and he stopped, not knowing what to do. Then he heard voices in serious conversation from behind the wall in the hall, Susie's voice, then a man's. Instantly, he knew that it must be her lover, Clifford. Despite everything, he was not prepared for the deception and cynicism of his wife. Her lover must have been waiting for him to leave. His healthy instinct would have told him to rush in and confront the liars and cheats, but his anger failed him, undermined by illness. He was stunned, unable to understand what had happened or how to react. He found it funny to eavesdrop on Susie's conversation with her lover. He had to face them. His rational mind came to this conclusion a moment before the impulse overtook him. Why be polite when what he felt was disgust at his lover's violation of his home? He retreated to his small office off the hall and closed the door to muffle the conversation. He sat down and gradually mastered his anger. One thing stood out through his anger: he should not have allowed the last days of his life to be monopolized by his wife's betrayal. There were more important things. He closed his eyes, trying to muster the strength to make a decision. His gaze glanced around the room, his sanctuary, where he spent many hours, over the shelves lined with books dating back to his childhood, over the stereo system bought piecemeal when he found good deals, over the beat-up computer. He was going to take his bag of walking clothes and leave this time for good. The bag was upstairs, and he would have to walk past the open living room door. As he stood up, his gaze fell on a bundle lying on top of the books on the top shelf. He took it off, unpacked the paper, and took out 2 swords in worn leather sheaths. The swords had belonged to his grandfather and had been given to him when his father died, naval ceremonial swords with steel blades and lots of tarnished silver on the hilt, head, and guard. His grandfather was an officer on the battleship at Scapa Flow and participated in the search for the Bismarck. He wore one of the swords when he was awarded the Distinguished Service Order at Buckingham Palace after the Arctic convoy to Murmansk in 1942. Of the 2 swords, he had a favorite. His grandfather told how he once wore it to a reception on board HMS Hood and allowed him to help clean the silver filigree on the head. It was a ceremonial sword, but real enough for Stan as a child to grip the hilt and imagine himself charging aboard the French 3-decker with Nelson, hacking at the defenders as he swung into the railing rigging. Now he hefted the sword, grasping the hilt, and wondered what to do if Clifford and Susie's defense was that they had succumbed to the natural power of love. He had a surprise for them. Clifford had to meet his nemesis. He heard someone walk from the living room into the kitchen, and when he looked out into the hall, he saw Susie picking up coffee. Quickly, he entered the hall, closed the kitchen door, and latched the hall bolt installed for added security after the burglar forced the back door. Then he entered the living room. Clifford stood with his back to the fireplace, and his smile froze when he saw Stan in front of him with a sword in each hand. They looked at each other in silence. Stan then threw one sword at Clifford. It hit him in the chest and fell loudly onto the furniture. "If I were you, I'd take her. You know who I am, so don't be surprised. I'm giving you a better chance than you gave me. Did you think you could take my wife without fighting? You thought I'd already died. You made a bad mistake, and now we will see how much you love my wife. Will you fight, or do you only care about her if you can steal her for free? Be warned, this is a duel to the death. I have nothing to lose. Only one of us will leave this room on our feet." "That's funny." Clifford's gaze was a combination of fear and horror. "Where's Susie?" "Look, you misunderstood. Put down those weapons and let me explain. There's no need for theatrics. I didn't come to take her away." Stan raised his sword, pointing the end at Susie's lover's chest. "Where's your pride? So, you're happy to steal but not fight? Let me put it this way, if you don't fight, you'll still die. I'll kill you like a mad dog, no seconds, no mercy. Please, let's find Susie. She'll explain everything. This is a duel. Be a man and don't try to hide behind a woman. I don't think you stand a chance with my rusty blade in your ribs. No, trust me, this is not an option. Nothing is worth it. It's up to you whether you use the sword. You have 30 seconds to prepare, and then we will begin the fight." "No, Susie asked me to come here. She was upset. She said you were sick and had to go to the hospital. I only came to help her and take advantage of her weakness. My wife isn't good enough in bed for you to fight for her. Shame on you." 10 seconds, Stan remained motionless, and Clifford must have realized that he was not joking. He grabbed the sword and raised the blade in front of his face to parry a light blow from Stan. The sound of the blades clashing was satisfyingly dramatic. Stan paused to steady himself. Perhaps the sword was not really intended to be used as a weapon. Stan had practiced foil fencing at school, but now he was weakened by illness and knew he wouldn't be able to hold a sword for long. He raised it high and swung it at Clifford. He didn't really care who won, but he wanted to make it a good fight. It was nice. Pistols would be better, but swords are also good. They were supposed to be equal opponents. In case you didn't understand, he exhaled forcefully. "We're fighting for Susie. Let's see how much you really want her and whether you're willing to die for her. Let me go, and I will never speak to her again, coward. Be a man." He attacked again, and Clifford dodged, almost cowering. One way or another, the battle could not last long. He was distracted by the sound of banging from the kitchen. Susie wanted to go out. Their blades clashed again as Clifford parried Stan's next blow. Now Clifford began to counterattack. He gathered his strength and raised his sword, pointing the end at Stan. He then rushed forward in a desperate attack and ran into Stan's blade. The sword broke at the hilt, and Clifford fell to the carpet, a 2-foot piece of rusty steel protruding from his chest. Stan dropped the handle and looked at the growing blood stain on the carpet before turning and unlocking the kitchen door. "Susie, what did you do?" Susie ran past him into the living room. He followed her and saw her hugging her lover. "It's too late," he said. "Your lover paid for your bad choices." Stan didn't have to do much planning. He thought about days, even hours. Susie was still in the living room when he picked up his bag, and he didn't even bother to check whether Clifford was really dead. He had seen enough blood to know that his sword had most likely gone through the heart. He examined his feelings and was surprised at how he felt little. Clifford deserved to die, but he did not feel the satisfaction of destroying his enemy, nor did he feel the guilt of killing, even though he solved the wrong problem. Clifford's death did not take away anything from his wife's betrayal, and he could not think anything about Susie. He was in his car and drove 10 miles from home before deciding where to go. "Keep going," he decided. "Keep going until you fall, exhaust yourself, and don't think." He drove all day, stopping at every gas station to buy over-the-counter painkillers, which could only be purchased a few packs at a time. Suicide was not his plan. He was in for a ton of pain, and he needed them for their intended use. It wasn't hard to imagine that if he had gone to the doctor to renew his prescription, he would have soon been arrested. By then, he must have been a wanted killer, and he stayed off the highways to avoid license plate recognition systems. He had dinner at a pub near Kendall and found a country road blocked from the road by trees and spent the night there, sleeping soundly in the car. The next morning, he set out early for St. Bees Head, the start of a long coast-to-coast walking route through the northern part of England. He had breakfast at a seaside cafe in St. Bees and set off with a light bag containing a waterproof jacket, chocolate, and a water bottle. At first, he was alone, but his pace was so slow that many travelers passed him, exchanging advice about the route and the weather and sometimes meeting at the pub for lunch or evening. It was a difficult but peaceful life. Nobody asked him if he was the sword-wielding killer whose photo was in the newspaper. Stan realized that he no longer looked like the healthy, happy man in the photograph that Susie must have found for the police. He walked maybe 10 miles a day. Some days, the pain became unbearable. Other days, it was normal. Every time he found himself in a difficult situation, people would stop and refuse to leave him alone. Each time, he had to convince them not to call mountain rescue or a helicopter ambulance, and on more than one occasion, he ended the day surrounded by assistants, virtually carrying him. Every morning, to his surprise, he found that he had a few more steps left, and he began again. It might be therapeutic if it didn't kill him. More than a week passed, and his efforts acquired a rhythm, but the miles traveled grew fewer each day, and he knew he would never reach Robin Hood's Bay, the end of the trail. Mostly, he walked half asleep, numb from painkillers. Every step caused a sharp pain in his hip. The day arrived with a sharp wind and bright skies. He picked his way slowly through a featureless moor on a steep climb to a cliff where boulders rose like giant warriors looking down at the slopes. He climbed 9 Standards Rig. The sky darkened, and without warning, the wind picked up, and the hail blinded him. He turned his face away from the wind and tried to continue on his way but got lost from the path and got stuck in a peat bog. After extraordinary efforts, he managed to free himself and return to the path. He advanced a few more steps, saw a wall of stone, and decided to take cover under its ledge. His shoes slipped on a wet stone. He tried to hold on and fell on his back. This time, there was no one around to see it. He didn't know how far he had fallen. He smelled peat, and icy water flowed under his collar. Then there was emptiness. Susie arrived at the hospital in the middle of the night. She received a call while she was at home having dinner. After such a long silence, she no longer expected to hear from Stan or the police most of the time. She was numb, deeply in shock, and not wanting to think about anything. The police didn't give her much information. Stan was in critical condition and was taken to the hospital in Yorkshire. He was in police custody but remained in the hospital. Susie washed the dishes, trying not to think, filled a thermos with coffee, and dressed in her warmest clothes. After stopping in town to refuel her car, withdraw cash, and buy sandwiches at a 24-hour supermarket, she set off on another long night journey. According to the GPS, the journey took 4 hours, and she was grateful for the time to prepare. She wondered if her life could get worse and decided that it probably could. She parked near the hospital emergency room entrance, finished her coffee, and found a water bottle. Then she left. A sleepy policeman sat at the entrance to the ward, but she presented her information at the registration desk and received permission to visit her husband. Stan was found in the swamps by hikers, unconscious and with injuries from a fall. He was delivered by helicopter. Since then, he has not regained consciousness. Stan was alone in a separate room, lying on his back, asleep. His eyes sunk deep into his colorless face, and he breathed with oxygen. It was obvious to Susie that he was very ill. For a long time, she sat and looked at her husband, trying to comprehend her thoughts. Finally, she leaned over and kissed his cheek. To her surprise, he moved his eyes, blinking, his hand reaching out to grab hers. "Stop the pain," he whispered, still holding her hand. As she leaned towards him to see if he had truly regained consciousness, his eyes opened, and he smiled. After a moment, he added, "I'm glad you came, Susie." He seemed to have fallen asleep again, and she was sitting on a chair next to the bed, still holding his hand in hers. She was shocked. Stan looked much worse than she expected, and she struggled with desperate feelings of love, panic, despair, and horror at the memory that she was Clifford's killer. Above all, she felt guilty about Stan's hopeless state, his ruined body a reminder of her destructive actions. She stroked the back of his hand, and when he let go, she found a nurse to ask about pain medications. It appears Stan suffered a fractured pelvis. He was too sick, and the cancer had done too much damage to repair. They would monitor his pain medications to find what would work best, but he was already on the maximum dose of morphine, the nurse informed her. Talk to him, distract his attention, make him hold on, the nurse advised. Hold on to what? Susie wondered. Prison was not a good place for a critically ill person. She walked back to the bed and sat back down, trying not to disturb Stan while he slept. After a few minutes, his eyes opened, and he was looking at her. She reached out and stroked it. I'm sorry, Stan, for all of this. I ruined everything. I wasn't there when you needed me, and I'll never forgive myself for that. I'm not leaving you now, she said. It's ruined, Susie. It's not your fault. You're here now, and I'm grateful for that, he spoke slowly, and she had to strain to understand his words even though he pulled away the oxygen mask. She stood up and leaned over to hear, and he touched her face with his hand. I'm sorry I killed your friend. He deserved it, but it's not fair that I took him away from you. You need someone to take care of you. I want you, Susie, she said. It's not fair. He remained silent and looked at her steadily as she tried to read his eyes, which weakened were the only part of him that seemed alive. Finally, he said, that's the way it should be. We had something once. It's better to love and to lose, as they say. Not everything was in vain. I need your help to die. Then I want you to continue living, find someone who will take care of you, and forget about me and all this trouble. Don't say that, Stan. I'm here now, and I'll be here for a long time. I never stopped loving you, she said. You don't understand. The pain is too much. I can't handle it. I don't even deserve to suffer like this. We need to say goodbye, and then I want you to help me leave forever, he said. She knew he was serious. It would be the same as murder if she found a way to hasten his death. Was this Stan's final test to see if she loved him enough to kill for him? Her tears flowed freely, and she wished she had the strength to know what to do. To add to her misery, she saw another twinge of pain engulf Stan. It started with a jerk. He grabbed the bedclothes and closed his eyes, remaining motionless and unresponsive to the world around him. She stroked his face, wiping away the sweat, and whispered like a mother to her child, but was powerless. After some time, she went to demand help, and eventually, a young doctor came and looked at the medical records at the end of the bed. He didn't want to look at Stan. He needs something for the pain, Susie, she said. We're doing everything we can, said the doctor. More than he's getting now is too much of a risk. The consultant will review the pain medications later this morning. You are not addressing the cause of the pain. It will only get worse. What are you saving him for, more pain? Please deal with the pain he is experiencing now, Susie pleaded. The doctor shook his head. I'm doing the best I can. You're upset, he's beside himself right now. It's much better to go and have a cup of coffee and gather your strength. Furious, Susie leaned over Stan and placed her hand on his face, kissing him on the lips. I'm sorry, Stan. I was trying to help, she said. She leaned over and kissed Stan's forehead and left. She was tired from lack of sleep and also from the shock of what she had done. Despite this, she felt excited, tears streaming down her face. The policeman at the entrance stood up from his seat and looked at her in surprise. Go home and get some sleep, he said good-naturedly. When it gets light, everything will look different. As she sat in her car in the parking lot, she realized she had no place to go and couldn't bear the thought of driving 200 miles home. Dawn was just beginning to illuminate the eastern horizon. She curled up in the chair and fell asleep. She woke up at 11 o'clock to a ringing sound on her phone. Her neck was stiff, her mouth dry, and the events of the night seemed like a dream. The call was from the ward administrator, who sadly informed her that her husband had died during the night. Susie expected more, but it didn't come. The administrator advised her that if she wanted to pick up her husband's belongings, they would be kept on the ward for 24 hours. Susie got out of the car and saw that she had been given a ticket for parking while she was sleeping. She walked back through the building, the policeman left, and Stan's room was already prepared for the next patient. She went to the office and spoke to the head nurse, who was new from the night shift. When Susie explained who she was, the nurse pulled out a small bag containing Stan's phone and wallet. Stan was at the morgue, and Susie asked to see the medical certificate of death. It was issued an hour after she left the ward and indicated the cause of death as carcinoma and traumatic injury to the pelvis and hip. "Will there be an autopsy?" she asked the nurse. "In such cases, no. With such aggressive cancers, the body simply gives up," the nurse replied. It took Susie a moment to come to her senses. She took a month off and walked the coast-to-coast route, following in Stan's footsteps. It would have been nice to do it with Stan, but she had fun at the sight of his fatal accident. She left a letter buried under a stone in which she wrote an apology that she never had time to convey to him. When she returned home, she found that she had lost interest in her job, and a large payout from Stan's job insurance allowed her to quit. The house was inevitably associated with Stan, and she couldn't bring herself to use the living room. She sold the house, moved to London, and found a poorly paid job as a legal advisor to a charity helping young offenders. Her work consumed her completely, and she met many worthy and generous people, including many charming men. Sometimes she went out to dinner with one of them, but gained a reputation as a rather dry person with an ironic tongue. Every year, she went on a hiking holiday, most recently on the GR20 route through the mountains of Corsica. Stan would have loved it. About a year after the drama, she received an invitation to a memorial service for Clifford. She thought seriously about what to do and decided that she should go. The service took place at St. George's Cathedral in Southwark, and there were about 500 people there. Clifford appeared to have been an important figure. She watched Clifford's family and listened to his praises and could not connect them with the man she knew so incompletely. The service was followed by a reception at a local hotel, but Susie chose to return to work, preferring to continue her business rather than attend the event. Subscribe to our channel so that your second half doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one. 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 What do you think of our story today? I think the story is exciting with an interesting plot. In this story, I was completely on my husband's side and completely justify his actions. What is your opinion? Write in the comments. Until new videos.